Thank you for hosting us, and good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. Just a few words on me and Ion as an introduction. I'm a founder, CEO, and 100% owner of Ion Group, which is a software company focused on automating critical workflow in financial markets. We started the company 20 years ago with a fundamental need to automate my own decision making when I was a trader at Salomon and then in a hedge fund. And over the years, we effectively experienced directly every phase of the evolution of a company, from a startup to now over 2 billion EBITDA and 13,000 people around the world. We made obviously a long list of mistakes, but also in our history we realized by reflecting on our own decisions some key facts that actually was a source of competitive advantage every time we were facing competition in the market or facing competition in buying companies. So a few observations here is, number one, the advantage of time horizon. So the observation here is that competitors and customers change the way they think about problems depending on the time horizon, and having a forever time horizon is a key source of competitive advantage. Secondly, thinking about the capital structure as a strategy to have reversibility in the capital structure, so without effectively compromising ownership and governance rights and information rights, which as the company grows could become an impediment for following different paths, strategic paths. Being aware of constant imbalances, so a company that is growing is always in disequilibrium. So the graph below is just an example of how at the beginning our competitive advantage was technology, then relative positioning vis-a-vis competitors, then business architecture, product offering, etc. Effectively, the awareness and the comfort, being comfortable with being permanently in disequilibrium is important, because then management team learn how to think probabilistically, which is really thinking about events, every event that happened to a company as a realization of a probability, or in fact a number of possible probabilities distribution, and therefore what is important to codify is how to interpret those signals, especially as the company grows in size and location. What I mean by that is effectively reacting in a codified way to the outcome that could be the realization of possible distribution, and therefore instead of overreacting, you actually codify the learning and help the company and the team to develop better theories. Productization means thinking about how to hyperscale everything that the company does, because on the right side, the key impediment for growth is really complexity and the inability to process information in a way that is efficient and predictable. In terms of our journey, so far we have identified many more questions than answer, We cluster our retrospective in really 4 main pillars. Number 1, capital structure, and to what extent having a clear strategy on the liability side of the company, and by this I mean the ratio between debt, equity, effectively how to design the bundle between economic rights, governance rights, and information rights in order to retain strategic flexibility to remain agile in a dynamic environment. If you common equity that seems to be an easy way to raise capital, in reality is irreversible capital structure instrument, which could actually affect the strategy and prevent the company to grow. Product strategy, meaning focusing on customer needs instead of capabilities, and differentiation of capabilities vis-a-vis competitors, because it's the customer and the evolution of those needs that is the true north for the company. Human capital strategy in terms of hiring and retaining what we call club members, effectively people that have the same purpose, the same mission, and are contributing to the learning and the experimentation, which is really the source of competitive advantage in my view in any companies. And then M&A as a way to explore possible frontier of what we do. Every time you do an acquisition, you're forced to reinvent yourself. You're looking at your own business from different perspective, and is effectively a way to keep reinventing yourself. And so the theory about thinking about M&A not as a way to expand a geography or a product, but as a way to experiment about business model, about human capital evolution, and about the frontier of a particular segment is a way to keep learning. When I was invited to this event, I think that the two communities, I started to reflect about the two communities, the academic community and the practitioner communities. And as a user, I simply apply basic categories to see how those two communities are actually touching each other. And those are a few reflection points. First of all, CEO founders have holistic needs, and yet the fruition of the great academic research is very granular, is very focused, and is not in canonical form, so it's not easy to consume. From accessing the knowledge, in our life, we're used to having knowledge one click away from what our needs are, and yet in academia, the knowledge is very fragmented, is organized by database, by author journal, and there are many segmentations. So for sure, this event is a great opportunity to bridge the gap, but there is also technology to be developed in order to allow practitioner easily to search by themes and by questions. Then in terms of ease of use, the there are no real canonical forms. Academia is organized in sticky communities, and when you find something, if you want to navigate vertically or horizontally, is quite a challenge. And for sure, that navigation is a way to access different type of knowledge without effectively segmentation and obstacles. Unified access, single sign-on, including the data that has been used for the experiments and the empirical research would be a great addition. And yet the academic world is organized in communities, and is not easy to understand where the frontier is. And finally, the evolution. I believe that in practice, CEO would benefit enormously by having a relevance engine that push upgrades of knowledge relevant to specific themes instead of the pool mode, which is organized, as I mentioned before, by author journals, etc. So this is for sure is where, in my view, we're going to see more and more bridges between academia and practitioners. In terms of what Alfonso, Arnaldo, and I have been doing in the past year or so, we have a passion for thinking about how decision-making and the framing of decision-making is a source of competitive advantage in the digital world. The pillars are really four, in our view. First, the technology to make a decision, scientific approach to decision-making. Then the domain, strategy, entrepreneurship, where effectively the space of discovery of customer needs, discovery of the business model, discovery of source of differentiation that are defensible is important. Then embracing fundamental uncertainty, because the exploration of needs and discovering new ways to compete is clearly a world of fundamental, deep uncertainty, but that is where the competitive advantage actually comes from. And then finally, how algos and artificial intelligence can actually free up cognitive time to spend more time on fundamental strategic issues. There are many themes that are relevant, and we are going to cover today. I'm not going to discuss this here, but effectively what we are starting to discover is the fact that the framing of decision-making is a way to unify many brilliant research that has been done on many fields, and yet perhaps there is a benefit in finding commonalities and a coherent framework across a number of silent themes. And then in terms of our research program, we applied our framework in four key domains: M&A, capital structure, human capital, and market innovation. And that is our overall research program that we're going to push at. And with that, Alfonso is going to cover the core topic of today's discussion.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you also for inviting me to this talk. I would like to briefly discuss a few issues here. At the same time, let me just introduce by saying that with Arnaldo and Andrea, the past year has been really super exciting, because Andrea shares a taste for academic research, and we have had several discussions of many sorts. we figured out that sometimes we were saying the same thing with different words, or we were using the same words for different things. But then in the end, we made a tremendous effort all together to converge. And I think that the outcome has been rather interesting, because my sense is that I personally have learned a lot. And so what I am going to discuss partly reflects this learning. You will see, as Andrea said, that we are probably providing a framework that we tentatively put up. This framework is based on Andrea's experience about the phenomenon, and Arnaldo's understanding and my understanding of the phenomenon of strategy. But it is a framework that we are quite open. And as Andrea said, we are probably raising many more questions than answers. So the spirit we would really like you to take this is as a way for raising questions that we hope all together we could answer. So the starting point, and we understand that this is a premise and a conjecture to be tested, but the starting point, which if you want, it's intuitive, but it has some appeal, is that one of the things that digitalization and algorithms are going to do is essentially to increasingly automate high frequency, low impact decisions. This is something that Andrea has really taught us, basically to use this canonical form of the distinction of decisions within companies. There are low frequency, high impact decisions and high frequency, low impact decisions. Of course, the reality is much more complex and grayer than this. But we, both Arnaldo and I, found this to be quite useful conceptualization to start our discussion. So essentially, if we follow this line of thought, the idea is that algorithms could actually automate to a greater extent high frequency, low impact decisions, and thus release and open cognitive time for decision makers to actually focus on low frequency, high impact strategic decisions, such as innovation decisions, M&A, capital structure, hiring of talented employees. The point that we want to make is that this is likely to make the why of firms relatively more important than the what, and particularly the how. Now, if we go to the next slide, why, what, and how is what we learned from, really, this was a discussion that we learned from discussing with Andrea. The labeling is what Andrea used to use in talking to us. It basically pushed us thinking in companies, there is always a why, a what, and a how. And Arnaldo and I tried to link this to the concept that we normally use in strategy. And we think that we can make a parallel, the why being the strategy ideation part, the what the strategy formulation, and the how the strategy implementation. So what is the why? The why is really the fundamental questions of companies. Why grow internally as opposed to externally? Why target specific customers as opposed to others? Why have a certain capital structure than others? The what is more, what are we going to do? What is the business model? How are we going to create value given the why within this company? What is the business model or the choice of specific strategy? The how is actually the implementation and the capability dimensions. How are we going to do it? So in this respect, the how is probably related to a greater extent to the high frequency, low impact decisions. The what, as we said, is a business model. The why is really the fundamental questions about why the firm exists and what is the general purpose of the firm. In this respect, we think that the algorithmization of high frequency, low impact decision is going to make the why a particularly important focus of how companies are going to work in the future. We have discussed this at some length, and we figured out that there are really three complementary dimensions that we think could explain the value of companies in a digital world based on what we have just discussed. And the first one is really a technology for decision-making under uncertainty. Probably if we free up cognitive time for low-frequency, high-impact decisions, which are typically decisions under uncertainty, companies need a better technology than what they have now to make these decisions, because they will be central within the company. An implication of a better technology for decision-making under uncertainty is actually that companies should create value by embracing uncertainty rather than escaping uncertainty. And Andrea said it very well. Probably the main driver of uncertainty and value creation is the granularity of needs of customers. The ability to understand what exactly customers want at a very granular level, it's a very important source of value, but this implies at the same time that companies embrace uncertainty, possibly thanks to a superior technology for making decisions under uncertainty. The third level, it's this idea of owners as strategists and their clubs. In a world of algos and where cognitive decision-making and time play a very important role, and the why plays important roles, you probably need decision makers who are motivated by very soft and hard to nail down elements, and probably the sharing of values is becoming central in order to understand how to operate. In this respect, the claim that we make is that the principal agent problems can be particularly severe in this context, because it's very hard to write contracts on intangibles such as knowledge development, cognitive development of knowledge making. So we foresee that owners will be increasingly get back into leading positions as strategists. So let's move to these elements quickly, one by one. We really hope to leave time for questions. So let me emphasize what Ryan said at the beginning. Please feel free to raise questions and issues. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we definitely would love to engage in a discussion and maybe say more things and make more precise statements in response to your questions, as opposed to statements that we make now. So the first element, as we said, is a technology for decision-making under uncertainty. And here is where Andrea and I and Arnaldo met with this idea that we need to get better frameworks for how to make decisions under uncertainty. And here, one discussion that we are pushing is that we are trying to codify the process of decision-making under uncertainty. And just to go very briefly, the idea is that this process is really made of two phases. One phase, which is an investigation phase based on sense making, and which is basically based on the choice of domain, what to focus upon, the mapping of domains, lay out the domain's characteristics, and the framing, which is the connection of domain and its map to the outcome of interest. At some point, this general sense-making phase ends and leaves the space to what we call problem definition, which is a specific nailing down of scenarios, actions, and payoffs. This is an important point, because whilst the investigation phase spans the entire potential uncertainty, in order to make a decision, you need to make an artificial reduction of uncertainty. Basically, you need a model. And this model is one way in which you can actually create testable propositions and experiments, very much like scientists do. So we do believe that there is a general spanning of uncertainty, but we also think that at some point the decisions requires an artificial reduction of uncertainty and model, which of course needs to be tested, that actually can give rise to these opportunities of making the decisions. Of course, these two elements are in continuous flow. So it's not just there is an investigation and a problem definition. After the problem definition, you may falsify your model, move to investigation again, back and forth. So the link between what we call the S, the infinite states of environment that you face under uncertainty, and the theta, which is the few states of nature on which you focus to make your decision, the link between these two, which we call psi, the psi, it's really the focus of the strategic approach, the scientific approach to decision making. Where does this link come from? It comes from theory, models, and experiments. And this ability to actually reduce uncertainty through your models, test, but then reopen uncertainty, it's the essence of the decision making. We would really like to emphasize this element. As Arnaldo puts it, it's like two pedals of a bicycle. You start with investigation, and next you do problem definition, but the problem definition can raise investigation again, and so on and so forth, in a process that we could think of as a sort of experimental theory of the firm, in which the firm is in a continuous flux of experimentation. The key is that the different ability to design these models and run this experiment becomes a key source of competitive advantage. With this apparatus, then embracing uncertainty becomes the source of business growth. Because in a world in which you have bad technologies for making decisions under uncertainty, you cannot exploit that opportunity. But in a world in which you have a better technology for making decisions under uncertainty, you actually want to take advantage of that opportunity. You want to seek rather than escape uncertainty. We already emphasized that the key uncertainty we are chasing is the granularity of need, the customer centricity of individuals, and the goal is actually to develop the knowledge in order to produce this. We actually call it delta K, the increase in knowledge produced by this process. And we think that delta K, the production of knowledge, really becomes the ultimate purpose of the firm. Why is it the ultimate purpose of the firm? Because by creating additional knowledge, companies can then make the right choices. A classical argument that we make is that a lot of the discussion, for example, on sustainability, the trade-off between sustainable companies versus profitability, it's a trade-off that can be overcome, because if companies develop delta K, then they can actually produce greater sustainability and profits rather than lingering on the trade-off. This requires owners as clouds, because essentially it's hard to write contracts in which we nail down a delegation process that can actually occur only if we raise the opportunities of shared understanding. So in general, what we believe is that the better framing becomes a key source of competitive advantage. Companies that have the ability to link a technology for decision-making, embracing uncertainty and granularity of need as a goal, are governed by clubs in which people come together because of the sharing of values, and particularly the delta K as a purpose, the search for new knowledge as a purpose. We think that this combination could actually be a key source of competitive advantage. And one of the things that we see is that some of the superstar firms that actually grow today actually grow by running many experiments and by the proliferation of this kind of opportunities. As we said, and we can go to the next slide, as we said, this is a framework that we put up. We are probably raising more questions than answers. We are framing it in a way that seems to be very specified, direct, and to some extent provocative. But as we said, this is the basis that we want to lay out in order to deepen our understanding of these processes and see to what extent this framework actually helps us to understand the strategy of companies in the Algo firms. As examples, M&A and capital structures are excellent examples of this process, and this has implications for the research agenda we would like to produce. Andrea, I don't know if you want to say a few final things on the research agenda and more generally conclude, or you want me to
no,
why
sure.
don't let me give you the word, and why don't you conclude?
Sure. Yeah, I think that the fundamental point is that codifying the technology of how to extract signals, and companies in their day-to-day life are exposed to billions of data, but without a theory, in fact, without having multiple theory to extract the signals and making sure that the entire management team and the entire organization can actually interpret and assign the same meaning to those signals is difficult to hyperscale. And digitization is a way to codify knowledge, to delegate to algos many decisions that consume a lot of cognitive resources in terms of tracking, in terms of making sure that variability is under control. And those cognitive resources can then be allocated to develop better technology to extract signals, to develop better technology to profile needs, to develop better theory to separate permanent needs versus transient needs, and therefore to explore more how to add value to customers and how to learn more about the outside. And so digitization is really a cognitive revolution in our view, rather than an operational matter, because to the extent that Algo free up cognitive time, and this cognitive time can be used through this scientific approach to explore, then each company can really enjoy increasing return, because the more you know, the more you can explore and monetize what you have learned, and so it's really a virtuous circle. And in terms of a research program, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think is having a unified framework to bring together many different fields of great academic research, which are yet very fragmented, could be a way to bring together those two communities of practice, where the data is, where the experience is, where the operational challenges are, and the theory, which, as our framework implies, is really the true north of a company. So companies with better theory explore more. They are more parsimonious in stretching their knowledge and pushing the frontier of knowledge further.
Ryan, we are happy to take questions at this point, or how do you want to proceed?
Yeah, absolutely. We did have first a comment from Swapan Ghosh. He says, we see similar patterns in other industries where robotic process automation with machine learning algorithms are used for high frequency or manual low impact workflows. So that was an interesting comment there. This question came in from Christian Bush. Says, thank you for the inspiring conversation. Assuming that many performance differences, especially related to innovations, are based on serendipity or quote, unexpected positive discoveries, how do you see the relationship between artificial intelligence and serendipity? Do you see ways in which AI could help, quote, accelerate and or inhibit serendipity?
Andrea, do you want to take it?
Go ahead, and then I'll add.
No, I think that of course there is a good deal of serendipity, and clearly artificial intelligence could actually help. For example, what we are seeing is models to explore zillions of compounds of drugs or compounds in order to see whether there are active principles and things like that. But I think what we are trying to suggest here is that, and again, this is clearly a characterization that makes things extreme just to make ourselves understand. Of course, reality is much grayer. Our point is that the decision to search in a certain space as opposed to the other is still a low frequency, high impact decision that has to do with some more fundamental characteristics of the companies. So if I can just make, again, and I understand it's a generalization that probably needs to be clarified better, but my sense is that these are issues that are particularly important in the how and possibly in the what, and relatively less in the why of the company. And what we think is that the why of the company becomes a key source of competitive advantage. Actually, one thing that I would like to emphasize, and this is again something that with Andrea discussed to some extent, a key low frequency, high impact decision is the decision of how to organize the automation of the high frequency, low impact decisions. So a very bad framing or a very wrong framing of how to organize artificial intelligence within companies could actually be a double-edged sword. It could actually imply that you have to spend more time on high frequency, low impact decisions as opposed to less time. For example, rather than automating the company at a general level, you keep automating simple and distinct and different processes. This would require a lot of time of the top managers in order to re-coordinate these processes. So the message we want to give is that a fundamental low frequency, high impact decision is exactly the decision of how to frame the organization of how you automate the high frequency, low impact decisions and the artificial intelligence within companies more generally. Andrea.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it is also important to note that data can come from outside the company, not only inside the company. And in order to make, I'll give you an example for M&A or capital structure. If you want to, those are infrequent decisions for a company, but they are not infrequent for the market as a whole, which is why, to some extent, private equity that are effectively making investment decisions as a frequent decision. They develop technologies which are better than in terms of negotiating terms, in terms of identifying value creation plan, in terms of identifying the right manager for the right job, etc. Simply because they have many more observations. So having theories allow companies to leverage data that are outside the company that could be as informative as what is missing inside the company because of the nature of the low frequency, high impact decision. And that obviously is not something that you can automate through machine learning on company data, because the data that you need to consume through modeling and theories is the cross-sectional data, which is outside the company. I don't. And the other thing is the robotic process automation. There was another comment. For sure generates data, but and that in itself can then help calibrating and developing new algo to free up cognitive time. But the technology to frame a decision and effectively to extract signals is a different technology than what is required to automate the process, because it's about expanding knowledge and exploring new business model, new customer needs. And so although robotic process automation helps standardizing and helps to some extent free up cognitive resources. Our approach is that framing is about identifying key variables that are connected in a logical way that helps seeing more quickly and points that otherwise you would consider very far away and not within the decision domain.
All right, very good. This question comes in from Kathleen Eisenhart. She asks, where does speed of strategic decision-making fit in? And is there consideration of whether the strategist has an overdetermined mental model or theory?
Thank you, Kat. This is a great question. So let me take it in two ways. First, on the speed of strategic decision making, here is and this is again something I learned from Andrea. If you have to make decisions more quickly, then probably the big implication is that you do not have time to run costly experiments, costly real experiments. But then this is exactly where you need to have general categories and canonical forms, because the best way to make quick decisions quickly is because you have a framework in mind that actually enables you, for example, by analogy or by some logic, to make the decisions quickly, because in your head, you already have quite a few pseudo observations about the problem that you can actually respond. So the response to the need to make quicker decisions is that, yes, you do not have time to run real experiments, then the more so you need to have mental frameworks that help you making these decisions more effective. Of course, and this is your second point, on the overdetermination of mental models, of course, we have overdetermination of mental models. Actually, the big downside of having to rely only, if you want, on mental models or largely on mental models, for example, because you cannot run objective tests, is that there could be overdetermination. But this is exactly the same problem that we face in science. Fortunately, in science, we eventually force people to make tests in order to understand whether the theories are correct or not. In the business, there is probably competition. So if you have an overdetermined mental model or theory, most likely competition is going to select you away. So we think that these are both very important problems, but and they are definitely issues that we see. If the market works, actually, the overdetermination could be clarified in this dimension, and the speed of strategic decision-making probably requires greater canonical forms.
All right, this question comes in through the Q&A channel. Rafal Dudaski asks, in pursuit of a competitive advantage in business, does it make sense for an organization to develop a capability for identifying strategic decisions that would benefit from AI support? What role would this capability play? Would it be turned into a competitive advantage?
Andrea, you want to take it or?
You go ahead and then I'll add if necessary.
I think, again, I mean, this is, and this is a good question which helps us to clarify. We are not, of course, putting artificial intelligence versus mental frameworks as one the opposite of the others. There are clearly complementarities. And this is definitely one of the questions that, for example, we would be interested in addressing. So the straight answer at this stage is I do not know, but definitely this is a great example of the kind of questions that we would like to understand better. For example, like the question I was suggesting earlier, is the question of how to create a framework for implementing artificial intelligence in the company and important low frequency, high impact decisions, and how companies can actually address this very important low frequency, high impact decision question.
Andrea, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that in my observation, having a framework that is consistent helps an organization to make sense of the data and extract more signals. So I think that irrespective of what or whether a particular algo is right or wrong, having the discipline of writing down the sequence of input and action that you're taking, and then looking at the outcome in real time and recalibrating is a great competence to be developed in a digital world. And for sure, it is a source of competitive advantage, simply because going back to the issue of speed will allow an organization just to extract more consistently signals and to experiment at a lower cost.
All right, this question comes in from Tomas. He asks, can you share your thoughts on if or how digitization and algorithms can also push for new business models in socially oriented settings, for example, education or healthcare? Furthermore, thoughts on how organizations should manage tensions underlying potential automation or digitization, and use cites as an example, managing a relationship with unions or a social view about what education and healthcare should be.
Maybe Alfonso, I'll address the first, and then you address the second question. So on the first question, I think the domain we don't believe that the domain is affecting the analysis in the sense. Given the setting, in this case, a social setting, the concept of identifying where the management teams and employees are wasting resources to control variability and to perform repetitive tasks is when and if automated, will free up time to explore more. For example, the type of relationship with the customers, the identifying attributes of customers and social communities that might be the driving force of the evolution of needs and so on. So companies are prisoners of tracking duties and variability, what I call effectively concrete octopus of stratified processes that are opaque and are impediment to the exploration. So to the extent any organization in any domain can free up cognitive time and develop ways to extract signals, then they will be able to profile customer better, to discover new needs, and to discover new ways to serve clients or to serve their communities in a more effective way. And this, in my view, does not depend on a specific domain.
Alfonso, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I had exactly the same kind of view.
Excellent. This question comes in from Christoph Zott. He asks, how does your view relate to received process theories of entrepreneurial strategy and decision-making, such as discovery-driven planning, lean startup, decision thinking, et cetera? How do you depart from these theories? And perhaps what would you say is the new angle you are taking?
Thank you very much, Chris. This is, let me just take it quickly, Andrea, and then maybe I can turn to you. But let me respond particularly to the literature thing, and then on the new angle, I'm sure that maybe Andrea will also have things to say. So first, I want to clarify, we are clearly working on the shoulders of giants here. We have just completed a piece for strategic management review, and definitely I would really like to say that we really took advantage of the opportunity of strategic management review to give us a push towards making a rigorous understanding of problems, but at the same time, the liberty to stretch issues a little bit when it comes to ideas that even if they are not tested, they can actually be useful to open up new questions and new research. In that piece, we of course refer to all this literature, and it's very clear that we understand that we are working on the shoulders of giants. So I would say that rather than point to any specific elements of what is our angle, I think that the attempt we are trying to develop here, it's really to build a framework that encompasses these different elements and actually opens up the way for creating an open platform where we can actually develop some specific issues. So for example, the emphasis on low frequency, high impact decisions, it's clearly not something that is novel per se, but the emphasis that we are putting on the importance of understanding low frequency, high impact decisions, I think is one way where we would like to push people to give more research. This idea that this is also linked to the return of owners as strategists, because the delegation process in a world filled with intangibles is a problem where the principal agent problem is particularly severe, is another angle. I would say that our attempt here is to link these different elements that by themselves clearly start from extant literatures, but by putting them all together can give us the opportunity to think more deeply about how companies can frame strategic decisions in a digital world.
Okay. This question comes in from Zeki, and then there we have an exciting dialogue in the set of questions in the chat that we'll get to. So this one comes in from Zeki, asks, given the experimental modeling opportunities afforded by machine learning and AI, should not executive ability judgment to select among options rather than generate options become more consequential?
Sure. I think that optimal matching is in itself can be studied, automated, and improved through Algo. Definitely we can see a world where the Algo are open source, are available, and the composition of those Algos and the calibration and the design of an organization that take advantage of the Algo is the key strategic decision, or one of the key strategic decision. Similarly, deciding where to explore in the knowledge frontier as extension of a particular path that a company is following, and effectively accelerating the ability of a company to experiment and to falsify theories is one of the consequences of freeing up cognitive time. So I definitely believe that we are going to see more and more theories developed within companies, and the digitization of operational activities it then becomes essential for company to explore needs, to explore what is driving those needs, to explore different models to satisfy those needs in a novel way, and so on. Alfonso, I don't know if you want to add anything to this.
No, I don't want to add. Let's take a few more questions if we have time.
Yeah, we have a few more minutes for questions. This one kicked off quite a conversation. This one comes in from Miriam Morani. They ask, do you think of this process of freeing up time for high impact, low frequency decisions to work within roles or people, for example, the top management team, or across roles / people? And for example, does it help mostly top managerial positions? And then, as a second question, part of that, does it create a larger distance between those who develop frameworks and make key decisions and those who execute?
What do you think, Andrea? You are ideal to answer this question. I have views, but you are ideal.
Well, I think that there are two separate questions. The first is whether this is a prerogative of top management or not. No, I believe that the learning how to codify steps performed by a worker, and then start thinking about how to automate and what information by digitizing those steps can be created to then define with the help of what I call quant manager or quant owner, those activities doesn't actually make the distance between employee bigger. You simply need to blend competences so that you have an algo designer and you have the operator and knows the steps, and together they free up respective time to build a better process and to have more time to explore. This has happened in finance. Just for some of you that know, now equity trading, over 70% of the daily trading is done by algo, and typically people are writing algos are a combination of risk manager, computer scientist, scientist, and there's a collective effort to extract signals, to build the models, and to calibrate those models. So in fact, I think that the collaboration will go up, and people doing operational activities and people doing algos will depend on each other more and more, and in fact will contribute to an expansion of their respective knowledge. And then on the second question, maybe Alfonso, you want to address the second one yourself.
Well, I think it's pretty much related to what you said. I mean, the process, if you want, on the one hand, there is a process of low frequency, high impact decisions at the level of the top management teams, but this percolates through the entire organization. So increasingly, there will be low frequency, high impact decisions that will also be taken, have to be made at different levels of organizations. And let's not forget that there is an ongoing process of entrepreneurship with spin-offs, spin-outs, and startups. So many employees can actually become low frequency, high impact decision makers themselves, simply because they create new companies. So I don't see this as a process in which you have an elitist situation, which only a few people can make these low frequency, high impact decisions. Actually, quite the contrary, what I see is that we need greater investments in education and in abstract and general thinking, because this is going to be a widespread tool and opportunities for many companies and at different levels of organizations.
This question came in from Rajari Agrawal. Following up on Miriam's question, previous question, I had a slightly different take. If AI models that examine data are to be implemented by mid-level managers and feed into decision-making judgment by top-level managers, what are the routines and processes to ensure that there is three-way complementarity for better decision-making on low-frequency, high-impact decisions?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
Sure. What are the routines and processes to ensure that there is three-way complementarity for better decision-making on low-frequency, high-impact decisions?
Well, developing theories requires also a passion to expand knowledge. And so I think that there is an aspect of sourcing algo and putting those algos together. There's a job to be done in terms of collecting data and systematizing data so that the algo can take decision based on this data. And there's a job to be done, which is developing new theories and expanding the frontier of knowledge, including how to combine those algos to then expand the areas of responsibilities of the algo part vis-a-vis the analog part. But I see this as the more you automate, you digitize, the more you discover way to push up the level and spend reallocate cognitive resources to the exploration part rather than the tracking and the implementation part. Obviously, different industry will have will be a different phase of this journey to digital, and there are activities that cannot be digitalized at all, simply because of there are manual aspect to the job. But developing theories that effectively identify what is common in activities that when you are within that domain seems to be very different, and yet if you abstract away you can find commonalities. That is really the role of developing theory that makes the possibility of using data in a different domain as a source of expansion knowledge in a domain that otherwise will, for example, not have the same enough data for digitalization.
All right, we'll close on this question, or rather these two questions. From Meyer Joshi, does the idea of freeing up the time of senior managers to make high impact decisions make them less capable to make those decisions, as they are no more involved in high frequency decisions and hence a bit far from the ground? And then as kind of an aside to this, what is the role of data scientists in this dynamic?
Yeah, no, I'll take this. No, I believe quite the opposite. Digitization and adoption of algo, in fact, force owners and top management to understand how the machine works. And therefore, the fact that algos are doing the work, it doesn't mean that top management doesn't need to know how the parameters, what algo, the parameter, the calibration, the testing, and the conditions where a specific algo can be used, or the conditions where a different algo needs to be used. In fact, there would be a convergence. More and more operational knowledge will be known by boards and by owners, because I see in digitization as a huge compression force of the how, the what, and the why, where effectively the knowledge of the how through the calibration of the algo free up time for the what and the why. So on that part, I see quite the opposite. Alfonso, you want to add to this?
I just want to say, since this was the last question, I would really like to thank everyone for this great set of questions, which made us thought. As we were saying at the beginning, the idea here is to open a discussion. We have given thoughts to this problem, and Andrea, as I said, has actually taught us a lot, but this is really an open discussion that we would like to follow. So the idea is in the future with Arnaldo and Andrea, we'll probably have initiatives like conversation, conferences, seminars on these topics, and we are open to contributions. We don't have clear ideas about how to do this, but definitely this is something we would like to work on. And as I said, we do not know much, so we would like to keep thinking but also to keep hearing from people. Delta K is the purpose of companies, but it's also our purpose. And we know that we can only grow Delta K if we hear from others. So please, if you want to give us feedback or participate in this conversation, feel free. We have this paper on the strategic management review, which is now available online. We'll be happy to get feedback on that paper, because that paper is a sort of summary of the things that the three of us have taught during the past year. So in any ways, if you think that this conversation is useful, know that we are happy to respond.
All right. Well, on that excellent ending note, thank you, Alfonso and Andrea, for participating in today's webinar. And thanks to all of you for watching.